Imagine waking up in ancient Egypt and realizing someone has switched the gods off. It's not a metaphor, temples sealed, names erased from inscriptions, statues chiseled away as if they never existed. And at the center of it all stands a pharaoh who no longer wants to be merely the son of Ammonius, but the man who rewrites the relationship between heaven and earth, Akhenaten. To many, he's the heretic pharaoh, to others, a visionary, to others still, a ruthless politician who uses religion as a weapon. And the most unsettling thing is this: however you look at it, his revolution is real. At the height of the New Kingdom, when Egypt is rich, powerful, and international, he decides to break the oldest pact of all, the pact with the gods. At first, he isn't even called Akhenaten. He is born as Amenhotep IV, son of Amenhotep III, in a golden age, palaces, festivals, diplomacy with the great powers of the Near East, and a vast religious system holding together state, economy, and identity. But right there is the crack. The temples, especially those tied to Ammonius, aren't just sacred places, they are power, land, wealth, administration, and a priesthood able to influence the kingdom almost as much as the palace. Amenhotep IV grows up in this world and, at a certain point, makes a choice that seems impossible. He shifts the center of faith toward Aten, the solar disk. Not a god with a face, not a statue carried in procession, but a light that touches the earth with rays ending in hands. A powerful symbol. If Aten is light itself, then you no longer need priests to manage the divine. You just have to look at the sun. And above all, who is the only authorized intermediary? The pharaoh. Here comes the twist. Akhenaten doesn't simply add one more god to the pantheon, as was often done. No. He raises Aten above all others, reduces the rest, and then begins to make them disappear. He changes his name, from Amenhotep Ammonius is satisfied, to Akhenaten useful to Aten, one who acts for Aten. It's a political act disguised as faith, or faith turning into politics. Either way, it's an earthquake. And to make the break total, he does something even bolder. He leaves Thebes, the city of the great temples, and founds a brand new capital in the desert, a city built for an idea. He calls it Akhenaten, the horizon of Aten. Today we know it as Amarna. It's not just a city, it's a declaration of war on memory. If you can't break Egypt with words, you rebuild it elsewhere, from zero. And in Amarna, everything changes, even art. If you think of a classic Egyptian statues, rigid, perfect, eternal, the pharaoh always young and divine, with Akhenaten, it feels like looking at another planet. The king appears with unusual features, an elongated face, prominent belly, wide hips, lines that are almost provocative. Family scenes show kisses, caresses, daughters on his lap, an intimacy rarely portrayed like this. It's propaganda, of course. It's telling you, I'm not a distant king, I am life under the light of Aten. But it's also a signal. A new language is being born to describe power, more personal, more mystical, almost obsessed with the idea that the entire world depends on a single luminous principle. And then the question explodes: was Akhenaten a monotheist? This is where you have to be careful, because reality is subtler than the myth. Akhenaten puts Aten at the center as the only true god for the court and the state, but that doesn't necessarily mean the population stops venerating other deities overnight. Many scholars speak of henotheism or monolatry. Not only one god exists, but only Aten must be officially worshipped. And then there's the most delicate issue. This revolution looks like pure spirituality, but in practice it shifts wealth and control from the traditional clergy to the palace and the new temples of Aten. So is it faith? Strategy? Or both fused into a total project, where religion, economy, and propaganda become the same weapon? While all of this is happening inside Egypt, the outside world doesn't wait. Egypt's empire in Asia is made of vassal cities, alliances, tributes, fragile balances. And here one of the most fascinating sources enters the stage: the Amarna letters, a diplomatic correspondence that shows governors and allied kings asking for help, reporting rebellions, warning of threats. And it's impossible not to wonder, while Akhenaten builds his religious utopia, is Egypt losing its grip on its empire? Some interpret it that way, a pharaoh focused on the cult and the new city, less present as commander and guarantor of international order. Others remind us foreign policy is complex and doesn't depend on him alone. But the narrative impression is powerful. The man who wants to illuminate the world from within risks letting it slip away outside. And then there is Nefertiti. Here the story becomes even more magnetic, because Nefertiti is not just a queen consort. She is a face of the revolution. You see her in ritual scenes, you see her with an exceptionally strong public role, almost on equal footing with the pharaoh in many depictions. And at a certain point, toward the end of the reign, the sources turn to fog, disappearances, names that change, possible co-regencies, figures like Smenkhare, and the shadow of a turbulent transfer of power. It's one of those moments when Egypt, usually giving you the illusion of a perfect chronicle carved in stone, shows its most human side, gaps, fractures, silences. When Akhenaten dies, his revolution doesn't die immediately, but it begins to be eaten from the inside. His most famous successor is a boy who, at first, is called Tutankhaten, living image of Aten. That name alone tells you the revolution, formally, continues. But then comes the plot twist, the name changes to Tutankhamun, living image of Ammonius, and with him the court turns back toward the old order. Traditional temples reopen, the priesthood regains power, and the capital Amarna is gradually abandoned. It's as if Egypt, after holding its breath, exhales all at once and says, never again. And here comes the cruelest part, the damnatio memoriae. Akhenaten is erased. Not just criticized, erased. His name is chiseled out, his monuments dismantled, his ideas turned into a shame to be hidden. For centuries, almost nothing remains of him but a ghost. And that's exactly what makes him immortal today, a pharaoh Egypt tried to forget, but archaeology brought back like a thriller. Because his story is a puzzle of power, faith, fear, and control. What was the real motive? Break the dominance of the temples? Create a pure, universal theology? Respond to crises, epidemics, social tensions? Or was it a personal, almost mystical project, in which Akhenaten truly saw himself as the sole bridge between humanity and the light? Every answer creates more questions. And the sharpest point is this, even if his revolution fails in the short term, it leaves an indelible mark. Because it proves that even Egypt, the civilization that seems the most eternal of all, can shed its skin in a single generation. It can take its gods, its rules, its art, its capital, and rewrite them. So when you hear Akhenaten, the heretic pharaoh who defied the gods, don't think only of a strange king with a solar cult. Think of a man who tried to monopolize the divine, to shift the axis of the world, to say, there are no longer 1,000 voices in the sky. There is only one light, and I am its shadow on earth. And then think of Egypt's response, a restoration so powerful it tried to erase him from time. But time, in the end, did the opposite, it turned him into the most unsettling and modern of all pharaohs, because his question is still ours, what happens when a leader decides to rewrite the truth, and calls it light? But time, in the end, did the opposite, it turned him into the most unsettling and modern of all pharaohs, because his question is still ours, what happens when a leader decides to rewrite the truth, and calls it light?